Before we dive into this absolutely incredible story, I need you to hit that like button right now, because what you're about to witness will completely shatter every assumption about strength, power, and what it really means to conquer an empire. This weakling human is about to accidentally destroy a galactic civilization through the most devastating weapon in the universe, spreadsheet optimization. Drop a comment and guess how a 140-pound office worker defeats an 800-year-old alien emperor who's never lost a battle. Trust me, the answer will blow your mind. The crystal spires of Draconis Prime gleamed like frozen fire against the blood-red sunset, their surfaces reflecting the celebration that had consumed the capital world for 3 standard days. 50 billion beings across the Draconian Empire watched the victory parade through holographic displays, witnessing what their emperor called the greatest triumph in the annals of conquest. Emperor Vexdal stood on the imperial balcony of absolute dominance, his 12-foot frame casting a shadow that seemed to devour light itself. His scales, each one a testament to centuries of battle, caught the dying sun like polished obsidian armor. 4 massive arms gestured toward the parade below, where the representatives of 147 conquered species marched in chains of ceremonial defeat. Behold! His voice boomed across the plaza, amplified by biotechnology that made his words resonate in the bones of every listener. The 147th species to kneel before draconian might. Let the galaxy witness the price of opposing the strong. The parade was a spectacle designed to crush the spirit of anyone who might dare resist the Empire. At the front marched the Titans of Regulus, 12-foot-tall crystalline beings whose homeworld had been reduced to mining colonies. Behind them, the warcast of the hegemony worlds, their 4 arms bound with neural inhibitors that prevented them from accessing their legendary combat rage. The void swimmers from the dark nebula followed, their ethereal forms contained in energy cages that made their natural phase shifting impossible. Each representative was a monument to military might defeated, a former champion who had failed to protect their species from draconian conquest. They were the strongest, fastest, most dangerous beings their civilizations could produce, and all had fallen in the arena of dominance to prove that physical power was the only currency that mattered in the universe. The crowd's approval reached crescendo pitch as the final group approached, the newest additions to the Empire's collection of defeat. The Kytherian war priests, 9-foot-tall mantis-like beings whose psychic combat abilities had dominated their sector for millennia until meeting draconian claws. The Alpha-strain berserkers from the Outer Rim, genetically engineered supersoldiers who had never known defeat until facing the Emperor himself. But then something happened that had never occurred in the 800-year history of these victory parades. The crowd began to laugh. Not the roar of approval that typically greeted displays of conquest, but genuine, uncontrollable laughter that spread through the plaza like wildfire. Even the chained representatives of conquered species lifted their heads, their various forms of eyes widening with disbelief. At the end of the line, stumbling slightly as he tried to keep pace with beings twice his size, walked a human. Marcus Webb stood 5 feet, 6 inches tall and weighed exactly 140 pounds after a large breakfast. His brown hair was disheveled from 3 days in a holding cell, his thick-rimmed glasses were held together with tape, and his wrinkled civilian clothes made him look like he'd gotten lost on his way to an office meeting rather than a victory parade. He clutched a small tablet computer against his chest like a security blanket, occasionally glancing around with the bewildered expression of someone who had absolutely no idea how he'd ended up in this situation. When a piece of ceremonial confetti landed on his shoulder, he actually stopped to pick it off and look around for a trash receptacle. Emperor Vexdal's mandibles clicked with irritation as the laughter continued. This was supposed to be a moment of supreme triumph, not cosmic comedy. "Silence!" he commanded, his voice carrying harmonics that could shatter stone. "You witnessed the champion of the species called humanity, a warrior so confident in his strength that he requires no armor, no weapons, no enhancement." The crowd's laughter only intensified. Several draconian nobles collapsed against their viewing platforms, their respiratory systems cycling rapidly with amusement. Even the Imperial Guard, being selected for absolute loyalty and emotional control, were struggling to maintain their stoic expressions. Marcus looked up at the Emperor with genuine confusion, adjusted his glasses, and raised his hand tentatively. "Excuse me," he called out, his voice barely carrying over the crowd noise, "but I think there's been some kind of mistake. I'm not a warrior. I'm actually in accounts receivable for the Colonial Administration Office. I was supposed to be on vacation." This statement somehow made everything worse. The laughter became so intense that emergency medical teams had to be dispatched to treat draconians who were experiencing respiratory distress from prolonged amusement. Emperor Vexthul felt something he hadn't experienced in 8 centuries of conquest: embarrassment. This pathetic creature was making him look foolish in front of the entire empire. But the die had been cast, the challenge issued according to ancient tradition. The combat would proceed as scheduled. "The human speaks," Vexthul declared, trying to salvage the situation. "Even now, he employs psychological warfare, attempting to lull us into complacency with false weakness. But tomorrow, in the arena of dominance, we shall see the true measure of his species." Marcus blinked owlishly behind his glasses. Arena of what now? The holding cell beneath the arena of dominance had been designed to house the galaxy's most dangerous warriors in their final hours before combat. The walls were constructed from neutronium-reinforced ceramics capable of containing beings who could punch through starship hulls. The containment fields could hold entities that existed partially outside normal space-time. The security systems were calibrated to prevent escape attempts by creatures with strength measured in megatons. Marcus Webb sat on the bench, legs swinging slightly because his feet didn't quite touch the floor, updating his vacation expense report on his tablet. "Okay, 3 days of involuntary accommodation," he muttered to himself, fingers tapping across the holographic interface. "That should count as business travel, right? The Colonial Administration has provisions for kidnapping-related expenses." He paused, looking around the cell that could have contained a small building. The security systems hummed with enough energy to power a small city, all focused on preventing his escape. "This seems excessive," he observed to no one in particular. The truth was that Marcus Webb was nobody's idea of a galactic champion. He had been born on Earth colony Kepler 62e, raised by 2 accountants, and had spent his entire adult life optimizing bureaucratic systems for the Colonial Administration Office. His idea of adventure was finding a new coffee shop. His most dangerous hobby was competitive spreadsheet design. He had been on Kepler 62e for a routine efficiency audit. His specialty was identifying redundancies in colonial supply chains, when the Draconian Empire had arrived. The evacuation had proceeded smoothly, with all essential personnel removed according to protocol. Marcus was supposed to have been on Transport 7, but had missed it because he'd been in the supply office trying to reconcile a discrepancy in the toilet paper inventory. By the time he realized the transport had left without him, Draconian forces were already conducting their standard, champion challenge, sweep of the planet. According to their ancient traditions, they would fight the strongest warrior each species could produce in single combat. Victory meant the entire species became part of their empire. It was a system that had worked perfectly for 147 conquests across 8 centuries. When they found Marcus hiding in a supply closet, clutching his tablet and hyperventilating about missing his transport, they naturally assumed he must be humanity's greatest warrior using psychological warfare to appear weak and harmless. His panicked protests that he was just an accountant were interpreted as sophisticated mind games designed to lull them into underestimating him. His obvious terror was seen as a clever ruse to make them drop their guard. His sincere offers to help them optimize their invasion logistics were viewed as attempts at psychological manipulation. And now, less than 18 hours before he was scheduled to fight an 800-year-old conqueror who had never lost a single combat, Marcus was trying to figure out if he could claim the entire experience as a tax deduction. "Let's see," he said, scrolling through Colonial Administration regulations on his tablet. "Involuntary participation in alien gladiatorial combat. That's not specifically covered, but it might fall under extreme business travel circumstances." The cell's security system chimed, indicating an authorized visitor. Marcus looked up hopefully, Maybe someone had finally come to explain the misunderstanding. Instead, the energy barrier dissolved to admit a draconian guard who stood 9 feet tall and looked like he'd been carved from living granite. His ceremonial armor bore the insignia of the Imperial Arena Command, and his compound eyes regarded Marcus with something that might have been confusion. "Human," the guard rumbled in heavily accented standard. "I am Guard Captain Thexmore. I am here to prepare you for tomorrow's combat." Marcus brightened considerably. "Oh, fantastic! You can help me clear this up. See, I think there's been a communication error. I'm not actually a fighter. I'm Marcus Webb, Senior Systems Analyst for the Colonial Administration Office. Here's my employee identification." He held up his tablet, displaying his official Colonial Administration ID complete with photo. The photo showed him smiling awkwardly at the camera, wearing a tie that didn't match his shirt. Guard Captain Thexmore stared at the identification for several long moments, his mandibles clicking thoughtfully. "Your psychological warfare techniques are sophisticated," he said finally. "To appear so convincingly weak and administrative, it must have required years of training." "No, you see, I actually am weak and administrative. That's my job. I analyze systems for inefficiencies and recommend optimization strategies. I haven't been in a fight since 2nd grade, and I lost that one. Badly. The deception is masterful," Thexmore continued, completely missing the point. "To claim you lost badly in previous combat, clearly you mean you allowed your opponent to believe they had won while you gathered intelligence for future encounters." Marcus stared at the guard with growing horror. "That's not. I actually got a bloody nose and cried for 20 minutes. My mom had to come get me from school. And this mom, she was your combat instructor? Teaching you to use emotional manipulation as a weapon? She was a dental hygienist." Thexmore nodded knowingly. "Trained in anatomy and the infliction of controlled pain. Ingenious." Marcus realized he was caught in some kind of logical loop where every attempt to explain his harmlessness was interpreted as evidence of his dangerous cunning. He decided to try a different approach. "Okay, let's ignore who I am for a moment," he said, falling back on his professional training for dealing with difficult clients. "Can you explain the specific parameters of tomorrow's combat? I like to understand systems before I interact with them. The arena of dominance," Thexmore began with obvious pride, "is where the fate of species is decided. Single combat between the Emperor and the champion of each species we encounter. The rules are simple: fight until one can no longer continue. The winner's species prevails." Marcus nodded, taking notes on his tablet. "I see. And what's the historical success rate of species who challenge the Emperor?" 0. 0% success rate? No species has ever defeated Emperor Vexthal in single combat. He is the greatest warrior in galactic history, undefeated in over 3,000 individual battles. Marcus looked at his notes, then at the massive guard who could probably bench press a small spacecraft. "And you expect me to fight him tomorrow? It will be an honor to witness your defeat, human. Your species will make fine additions to the Empire." "Right," Marcus said weakly. "Just one more question. Are there any rules about weapons, armor, magical enhancements, psychic powers, that sort of thing? Combat may be conducted with any equipment or abilities the combatants possess naturally." Marcus looked down at his tablet, then back at the guard. "Would you classify this as equipment I possess naturally? If it is part of your standard loadout as a warrior, then yes. And if I wanted to, say, review historical data about previous arena combats while fighting?" Thexmore's mandibles clicked with what might have been amusement. "Your confidence in your ability to multitask during Mortal Kombat is impressive." After the guard left, Marcus sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of his situation finally sinking in. In less than 18 hours, he would be facing an alien emperor in single combat with the fate of humanity hanging in the balance. He had never thrown a punch in anger, had never learned martial arts, and had a panic disorder that made him hyperventilate when people raised their voices. But he did have his tablet, and he did have access to the arena's database systems, apparently the Draconians had never considered that someone might use the holding cell's entertainment system to conduct unauthorized research. Marcus Webb might not know how to fight, but he knew how to analyze systems. And according to his preliminary data review, the Draconian Empire was the most successful, longest-running, most impressive system he'd ever encountered. Which, in his professional opinion, meant it was probably due for a complete overhaul. He opened a new spreadsheet and got to work. The Arena of Dominance had been constructed during the early days of the Draconian Empire, designed to showcase the absolute superiority of their warrior culture. The fighting pit was a perfect circle, 200 meters in diameter, surrounded by tiered seating that could accommodate 50 million spectators. The architecture itself was a weapon of psychological warfare, every line and angle calculated to make visitors feel small, weak, and inevitable doomed. On the morning of Marcus Webb's scheduled combat, beings from across the galaxy had gathered to witness what everyone assumed would be the shortest championship fight in arena history. The betting odds were 50,000 to 1 against the human, and even those seemed generous to most observers. Emperor Vexthal stood in the Imperial Preparation Chamber, performing the ritual armoring ceremony that preceded each combat. His primary weapon, a vibroclaw that could cut through starship armor, was blessed by the High Priest of Dominance. His secondary weapons, neural disruptors that could paralyze beings the size of small buildings, were consecrated with the blood of previous champions. His tertiary weapons, because the Emperor believed in redundancy, were polished to mirror brightness. My Emperor, his chief advisor, War Marshal Drexquin, approached with obvious concern. The human, there is something unusual about his behavior. Explain. He has spent the entire night accessing the arena's historical database. Our monitors show he has reviewed every combat record from the past 4 centuries, cross-referenced them with Imperial military doctrine, and created what appears to be analytical spreadsheets. Emperor Vexthal paused in his armoring ritual. Spreadsheets? Statistical analyses of combat patterns, efficiency metrics, resource allocation charts. He has organized your previous victories into 17 different categories and created performance graphs. The Emperor's compound eyes focused on his advisor with laser intensity. He studies my techniques to find weaknesses? That's what we assumed initially. But War Marshal Drexquin hesitated. He appears to be conducting a comprehensive efficiency audit of your combat methodology. What does that mean? We're not entirely sure, my Emperor. Human analytical techniques are alien to our thinking. But he has created something called a process optimization report with recommendations for improving your combat effectiveness. Emperor Vexthal felt his mandibles click involuntarily. In 8 centuries of warfare, no opponent had ever offered to help him fight better. What manner of psychological warfare is this? We believe he may be attempting to confuse you by treating mortal combat as some kind of business process. The Emperor considered this information as his servants attached to ceremonial armor. The human's behavior defied every strategic paradigm he understood. Warriors studied their opponents to find weaknesses, not to offer performance improvement suggestions. My Emperor, War Marshal Drexquin continued, there is one more thing. The human has requested permission to bring his tablet into the arena. For what purpose? He claims he wants to present his findings during the combat. Emperor Vexthal stared at his reflection in the polished surface of his primary weapon. In all his centuries of conquest, this was the first time he genuinely had no idea what his opponent was planning. Grant his request, he said finally. I am curious to see what this human considers an effective strategy. Meanwhile, in his holding cell, Marcus Webb was experiencing what his therapist would have diagnosed as a mild panic attack mixed with hyperfocus, a combination that had gotten him through many late-night deadline crises at the Colonial Administration Office. Okay, he muttered to himself, reviewing his analysis for the 15th time. Patterns are consistent across all 147 previous combats. Victory methodology follows identical structure in 96.8% of cases. There's definitely a system here. His tablet displayed charts that would have been incomprehensible to any being thinking in terms of traditional combat, but made perfect sense to someone who spent their life analyzing organizational inefficiencies. Emperor Vextol's approach to arena combat wasn't warrior instinct, it was a highly refined, standardized procedure. Phase 1: Psychological intimidation through display of superior equipment and physical prowess. Phase 2: Strategic engagement designed to demonstrate overwhelming tactical superiority. Phase 3: Ritualistic finishing sequence that maximized psychological impact on the defeated opponent's species. The Emperor wasn't adapting his strategy to each opponent, he was following the same basic script he'd perfected over centuries, with minor variations for different opponent types. It was systematic, efficient, and absolutely devastating against anyone expecting traditional combat. But Marcus wasn't thinking about traditional combat. He was thinking about process optimization. Right, he said, closing his laptop and taking several deep breaths to control his panic response. I can't fight him. But maybe I can consult him? The cell's security system chimed, indicating it was time for the arena. Marcus stood up, straightened his rumpled civilian clothes, and picked up his tablet. He was about to become either the most unlikely hero in galactic history, or the most thoroughly documented failure. Either way, he was going to approach it professionally. The crowd's roar was deafening as Marcus walked onto the arena floor, stumbling slightly as the magnitude of his situation hit him. 50 million beings were watching him, and every single one of them expected to see him die in the next few minutes. The arena itself was overwhelming, a vast circle of polished stone surrounded by tiers of seating that seemed to stretch up to the planet's moon. Holographic displays showed his vital signs, betting odds, and a countdown timer that his opponents apparently found amusing. Emperor Vextol emerged from the opposite entrance, and Marcus felt his knees go weak. The Emperor was a monument to 8 centuries of successful violence. 12 feet of scaled muscle and armor, 4 arms each carrying weapons that hummed with deadly energy, eyes that seemed to burn with the light of conquered stars. When he moved, it was with the fluid grace of something that had perfected the art of killing. Marcus, by contrast, nearly tripped over his own feet walking to the center of the arena. The traditional pre-combat ceremony began with Emperor Vextol displaying his arsenal. Each weapon was a masterwork of destructive engineering, vibroclaws that could cut through neutronium, plasma projectors that could melt starship hulls, neural disruptors that could shut down organic nervous systems from a distance. Behold! The Emperor's voice echoed through the arena. The tools by which 147 species have learned the price of defying draconian might. What weapons do you bring to this combat, human? Marcus held up his tablet. The crowd's laughter was so loud it registered on seismic sensors throughout the capital city. This is my analytical tablet, Marcus explained, his voice somehow carrying through the arena's acoustics despite being barely above a conversational tone. It has spreadsheet capabilities, database access, and a really good calculator app. Emperor Vextol stared at the device, then at Marcus, then back at the device. In 8 centuries of combat, this was the first time he'd encountered an opponent who brought office supplies to a death match. Human, he said slowly. Do you mock the traditions of the arena? Oh, no, sir, Marcus replied quickly, adjusting his glasses nervously. I respect your traditions completely. I've spent considerable time analyzing them, actually. Your combat methodology is quite impressive from a systemic standpoint. The Emperor paused. Compliments from opponents were rare in his experience. You approve of my techniques? Absolutely. Your approach to arena combat demonstrates remarkable consistency and efficiency. I've documented your performance metrics across 147 previous engagements, and the results are genuinely impressive. Marcus activated his tablet, displaying charts and graphs on the arena's holographic systems. Your psychological intimidation phase shows a 98.7% success rate in producing measurable fear responses in your opponents. Your tactical engagement protocols are optimized for maximum demonstration of superiority while minimizing personal risk. And your finishing sequences are designed to create lasting psychological impact on the defeated opponent's entire species. The crowd had gradually fallen silent as Marcus continued his presentation. This wasn't typical pre-combat banter. However, Marcus continued, completely absorbed in his analysis. I have identified several areas where your process could be optimized for even better results. Emperor Vexthal felt his worldview shift slightly. You wish to help me fight more effectively? Well, yes. I mean, if we're going to do this, we might as well do it right. Your current approach is excellent, but it's developed some inefficiencies over time that could be streamlined. The Emperor found himself genuinely curious. What inefficiencies? For example, Marcus said, pulling up a performance graph. Your Phase 1 intimidation display has remained essentially unchanged for the past 2 centuries. While effective, it's become somewhat predictable. Your opponents are now spending an average of 23% less time in fear paralysis because they've seen recordings of previous combats. And your recommendation? Rotation of intimidation elements based on opponent psychology profiles. I've prepared a matrix that cross-references species' psychological vulnerabilities with weapon display options. It could increase fear response time by approximately 34%. Emperor Vexthal stared at the human who was offering to help him become a more efficient killer. This was unprecedented in his entire military career. Human, why do you offer to improve my combat effectiveness when I am about to defeat you? Marcus looked genuinely surprised by the question. Because that's what I do. I analyze systems and recommend optimizations. Your combat system is fascinating from a process efficiency standpoint. The fact that I'm about to lose to it doesn't change the fact that it could be improved. The Emperor felt something he hadn't experienced since his youth: intellectual curiosity overriding combat instinct. Show me these optimizations. For the next 20 minutes, Marcus Webb gave a detailed presentation on combat efficiency optimization to an audience of 50 million beings who had come to watch him die. He discussed resource allocation, strategic redundancies, psychological warfare effectiveness metrics, and post-victory administrative protocols. The crowd listened in fascination as this nervous human in civilian clothes systematically analyzed the combat techniques of the galaxy's greatest warrior and offered suggestions for improvement. Emperor Vexthal found himself taking notes. Your Phase 3 finishing sequences, Marcus continued, while psychologically effective, consume 23% more time and energy than necessary. I've developed an alternative approach that maintains psychological impact while improving efficiency. Demonstrate. Marcus pulled up a comparison chart. Current method involves ritualistic display of superiority followed by ceremonial defeat administration. Alternative method front-loads the psychological impact and reduces the ceremonial components to essential elements only. And the effectiveness difference? Maintains 94% of psychological impact while reducing time expenditure by 31% and energy cost by 19%. Over multiple combats, this represents significant efficiency gains. The Emperor stared at the analysis, realizing that this human had just optimized 8 centuries of warrior tradition into a more efficient process. Human, he said slowly, what is your primary profession? Systems Analyst for the Colonial Administration Office. I specialize in identifying inefficiencies in bureaucratic processes and recommending optimization strategies. And you apply these techniques to everything? Pretty much. Efficient processes are efficient processes, regardless of the specific application. Emperor Vexthal felt his understanding of the universe shift. This wasn't a warrior using psychological warfare. This was an analyst who treated combat as just another system to be optimized. Human, I have ruled an empire for 8 centuries, conquered 147 species, commanded fleets that span galaxies. And you believe my methods could be improved? Marcus nodded enthusiastically. Oh, absolutely. Don't get me wrong, your empire is incredibly impressive. But from an organizational efficiency standpoint, there are definitely areas for improvement. Explain. Well, for starters, your resource allocation for conquered territories is running about 23% over optimal efficiency levels. You're maintaining larger administrative overhead than necessary. Your supply chains have redundant layers that increase costs without improving outcomes, and your military structure has evolved some bureaucratic inefficiencies that are impacting operational effectiveness. The Emperor sat down heavily on the arena floor, his worldview cracking under the weight of systematic analysis. You have analyzed my entire empire? Just preliminary assessment based on publicly available data. I'd need to do a full audit for detailed recommendations, but yes, there are definite optimization opportunities. Emperor Vextal looked around the arena, at the 50 million beings watching this unprecedented exchange, at his advisors who were frantically trying to figure out what was happening, at the human who was treating his mighty empire like a poorly organized filing system. Human, he said finally, what would you require to conduct this full audit? Marcus brightened considerably. Really? That would be fantastic. I'd need access to your administrative databases, resource allocation records, organizational charts, budget documentation, and about 6 months to conduct a comprehensive efficiency analysis. And in exchange? Well, I'd provide you with a complete optimization report including recommended structural reforms, process improvements, and efficiency protocols that could significantly improve your empire's performance across all metrics. The crowd had fallen completely silent. The greatest warrior in galactic history was negotiating business consulting services with his intended victim in the middle of a death match. Human, this combat was intended to determine the fate of your species. Marcus nodded. Right, but honestly, defeating me in combat doesn't really prove anything about humanity's capabilities. I'm basically the least representative human you could have chosen. It would be like judging your entire empire based on, I don't know, your least competent accountant. What would prove your species' capabilities? Well, if you really want to evaluate humanity, you should probably look at our systematic achievements. Organizational capabilities, technological innovation, administrative efficiency, that sort of thing. Combat prowess is just one metric among many. Emperor Vextal felt centuries of warrior philosophy collapsing around him. This human was suggesting that physical dominance wasn't the ultimate measure of species worth. And if your people could improve the efficiency of my empire? Then you'd have a stronger empire. More effective resource utilization, better administrative processes, optimized military structures. You could probably maintain the same level of control with significantly fewer resources, which would free up capacity for expansion or development projects. The Emperor stared at Marcus for several long moments, processing the implications of what he was hearing. Human, you offer to make my empire stronger? If that's what you want, yes. I mean, it's an interesting optimization challenge. Your empire is the most successful conquering organization in galactic history. Analyzing its inefficiencies and developing improvement strategies would be professionally fascinating. Emperor Vextal stood slowly, his forearms spread wide in a gesture that had traditionally preceded the final phase of combat. Instead, he began to laugh. It started as a low rumble that built to a roar of genuine amusement. The sound echoed through the arena, carrying a note of discovery that made the crowd lean forward in anticipation. Human, he said, his voice filled with something that might have been admiration. In 8 centuries of conquest, you are the first opponent to defeat me. Marcus looked confused. But we haven't actually fought yet. No, human. You have done something far more devastating than defeat me in combat. You have made me realize that my entire approach to conquest has been inefficient. The Emperor turned to address the crowd, his voice carrying to every corner of the arena. Citizens of the Draconian Empire, today you witness the end of an era. This human has shown me that true strength lies not in the perfection of violence, but in the optimization of systems. He turned back to Marcus, extending one massive claw. Human Marcus Webb, I offer you a position as Chief Efficiency Consultant to the Draconian Empire. Your first assignment will be to analyze and optimize our entire governmental structure. Marcus stared at the extended claw, then at the Emperor, then at the 50 million beings watching this unprecedented moment. Does this mean I don't have to fight you? Human, you have already won the most complete victory possible. You have changed how I think about victory itself. Marcus shook the Emperor's claw, still processing what had just happened. So, does this count as business travel for tax purposes? 6 months later, the former Draconian Empire had been restructured into the Cooperative Galactic Alliance, and Marcus Webb's office occupied what had previously been the Imperial Torture Chamber. He had kept the intimidating architecture but added better lighting, ergonomic furniture, and a coffee machine that could serve 17 different species preferred beverages. The transformation had been remarkable to witness. Marcus's efficiency audit had revealed that the Empire's administrative overhead was consuming 67% of its total resources. Its military structure had evolved redundant command layers that made rapid response impossible, and its conquest-based economic model was actually less profitable than trade-based alternatives would have been. The numbers don't lie, Marcus explained to Emperor Vexthul, now Executive Director Vexthul, during their weekly optimization review meeting. Cooperative trade partnerships generate 340% more long-term value than conquest-based resource extraction, while requiring 89% fewer military resources. Vexthul studied the projected revenue charts with the same intensity he had once applied to military strategy. And species satisfaction metrics? Up 456% across all territories. Turns out people are much more productive when they're voluntary partners rather than conquered slaves. Who knew? The former emperor had taken to efficiency optimization with the same dedication he had once applied to conquest. His office walls were covered with organizational charts, process flow diagrams, and performance metrics. He had traded his ceremonial weapons for presentation equipment, and had become genuinely excited about quarterly efficiency reports. Marcus, he said, using the human's first name as he had grown comfortable doing. I must admit something to you. What's that? This is more satisfying than conquest ever was. Marcus looked up from his tablet, where he was reviewing resource allocation optimization for the Outer Rim territories. Really? When I conquered a species, I achieved a single moment of victory followed by centuries of administrative management. When we optimize a system, we create ongoing improvement that benefits everyone involved. The satisfaction is sustainable. Plus, Marcus added, it's a lot less paperwork than processing conquest documentation. Indeed. Your optimization of our bureaucratic processes alone has freed up resources equivalent to maintaining 12 fleet groups. They were interrupted by Marcus's assistant, a former Draconian general named Krextull who had discovered an unexpected talent for scheduling and project management. The transition from military command to administrative support had been surprisingly smooth once he realized that logistics coordination skills were highly transferable. Director Webb, Krextull announced. The delegation from the Hegemony Worlds has arrived for their efficiency consultation. Marcus nodded, gathering his presentation materials. Word of the Draconian transformation had spread throughout the galaxy, and other empires were beginning to request Marcus's consulting services. The Hegemony Worlds wanted to optimize their military-industrial complex. The Crystalline Collective was interested in streamlining their consciousness-sharing networks. Even the notorious Void Pirates had inquired about improving their raiding efficiency. The usual conference room? Marcus asked. Conference Room 7, the one with the holographic presentation capabilities and the adjustable environmental controls. Marcus smiled. Conference Room 7 had previously been the arena of dominance. Converting it to a meeting space had been one of his more satisfying optimization projects. As he walked through the corridors of what had once been the most feared military installation in the galaxy, Marcus reflected on how dramatically his life had changed. He had gone from a nervous accountant afraid of confrontation to the galaxy's most sought-after efficiency consultant. He was now personally responsible for optimizing the administrative systems of 147 different species, and his recommendations were reshaping galactic civilization. The irony wasn't lost on him that he had accomplished more by avoiding a fight than anyone had ever achieved by winning one. Marcus, Executive Director Vexthul called out, catching up to him in the corridor. Before your meeting with the Hegemony delegation, I wanted to discuss the proposal from the Galactic Council. The Peacekeeping Optimization Project? Yes. They're offering to make you the chief efficiency coordinator for all galactic governmental systems. You would essentially be responsible for optimizing democracy itself. Marcus stopped walking, the magnitude of the offer sinking in. That would be the largest systems analysis project in galactic history. Indeed. What are your thoughts? Marcus considered the opportunity. The Galactic Council represented over 2,000 species across multiple galaxies. Their governmental structure had evolved over millennia into a complex web of bureaucratic inefficiencies, redundant committees, and administrative bottlenecks that made decisive action nearly impossible. From a professional standpoint, it would be the ultimate optimization challenge. Would I get to keep my current coffee machine? Vexthal's mandibles clicked with amusement. I believe that could be arranged. Then yes. Let's optimize galactic democracy. How hard could it be? As Marcus entered Conference Room 7 to meet with the hegemony delegation, he paused to look around the space that had once been the arena of dominance. Where 50 million beings had once gathered to watch ritual combat, there were now comfortable seating arrangements, holographic presentation equipment, and a refreshment station that could accommodate the dietary needs of 73 different species. The hegemony delegation was already seated around the circular conference table, 5 imposing beings whose homeworld had been conquered by the Draconians 3 centuries earlier. They were warrior diplomats, each one a veteran of countless battles, and they regarded Marcus with the same confusion that had become familiar to him over the past months. Director Webb, the lead delegate, War Counselor Vex Mari, stood to greet him. At 8 feet tall with 4 arms and natural armor plating, she was an impressive figure. We come seeking the administrative wisdom that transformed our former conquerors. Marcus smiled, settling into his chair and opening his tablet. Thank you for coming. I've reviewed the preliminary data you sent about your military-industrial complex, and I think there are definitely some optimization opportunities we can explore. We must admit. Another delegate, General Krigstar, interjected. We are uncertain about your methods. Our intelligence reports suggest you defeated the Draconian Empire without firing a single shot. That's correct. I never actually fought anyone. I just showed them how to run their empire more efficiently. The delegation exchanged glances. War Counselor Vex Mari leaned forward with obvious interest. Explain this process. Marcus activated his presentation display, showing organizational charts and efficiency metrics. The Draconian Empire was suffering from what we call legacy system inefficiency. Their administrative structure had evolved over centuries without systematic review, creating redundant processes, bureaucratic bottlenecks, and resource waste. And your solution? Process optimization. Streamlined command structures, eliminated redundant administrative layers, redesigned resource allocation protocols, and restructured their economic model from conquest-based to partnership-based. General Krigstar studied the data with growing amazement. These efficiency improvements, they increased overall imperial capacity by over 300%. More importantly, they increased satisfaction metrics across all territories by 456%. Happy partners are more productive than conquered subjects. It turns out motivation is a significant factor in economic output. The lead delegate was taking notes with the intensity of someone learning a completely new form of warfare. Director Webb, could these techniques be applied to our own governmental systems? Absolutely. That's why you're here, isn't it? Let me show you what I've identified in your current structure. For the next 3 hours, Marcus walked the hegemony delegation through a comprehensive analysis of their military-industrial complex. He identified 17 major inefficiencies, 12 redundant bureaucratic processes, and 7 opportunities for strategic optimization that could improve their overall effectiveness by 67%, while reducing operational costs by 23%. Your current military procurement system, he explained, highlighting specific data points, involves 14 separate approval stages, 7 redundant oversight committees, and 3 independent verification processes that essentially duplicate the same quality control functions. This prevents corruption and ensures quality. War Counselor Vex Mari defended. Actually, it creates corruption opportunities at 14 different points while slowing procurement by 340% and increasing costs by 89%. I can show you how to maintain quality control with better oversight using half the resources and a third of the time. By the end of the meeting, the hegemony delegation had contracted Marcus for a full governmental optimization project. They would be the fourth major galactic power to hire him for systematic efficiency analysis, joining the reformed Draconian Cooperative, the Crystalline Collective, whose consciousness-sharing networks were running 67% more efficiently after his recommendations, and the Void Pirates, who had discovered that optimized raiding operations were both more profitable and generated fewer casualties. As the delegation departed, Executive Director Vextol joined Marcus in the conference room. How was the consultation? Successful. They're experiencing the same basic inefficiencies as most legacy governmental systems, bureaucratic layers that developed organically over time without strategic review, resource allocation protocols that prioritize tradition over effectiveness, and decision-making structures that optimize for consensus rather than results. Vextol settled into one of the chairs, his massive frame making the furniture creak slightly. Marcus, may I ask you something that has been troubling me? Of course. 6 months ago, you were a systems analyst for a colonial administration office. Today, you are personally responsible for optimizing the governmental structures of half the galaxy. Does this concern you? Marcus considered the question while reviewing his notes from the meeting. You mean the scope of responsibility? I mean the power. You now have the ability to reshape galactic civilization through your recommendations. Entire species' futures depend on your analyses. Does this not intimidate you? Marcus looked up from his tablet, genuinely surprised by the question. Why would it intimidate me? It's just systems analysis on a larger scale. The principles are the same whether you're optimizing supply chain logistics for a colonial outpost or governmental structures for a galactic empire. But the consequences are proportional to the scope of the system, yes. But that doesn't change the analytical approach. You identify inefficiencies, design optimization strategies, implement improvements, measure results, and iterate. The size of the system doesn't change the methodology. Vextol stared at his former victim, now his closest advisor, with something approaching awe. You truly see no difference between optimizing a filing system and optimizing galactic civilization? Well, galactic civilization is more complex, obviously. More variables to account for, more stakeholders to consider, more potential failure modes to plan for. But fundamentally, it's still about making systems work better for the people who depend on them. And you feel no weight of responsibility? No fear of making mistakes that could affect billions of beings? Marcus paused, considering this seriously for the first time. I suppose the stakes are higher, yes. But fear of making mistakes doesn't improve analytical accuracy. If anything, it introduces emotional bias that reduces effectiveness. Better to focus on thorough analysis, comprehensive testing, and iterative improvement. You treat the fate of galactic civilization as a professional challenge. What else would I treat it as? I'm not a philosopher or a political leader or a military strategist. I'm a systems analyst. This is what I do. I make systems work better. The fact that these particular systems happen to govern the lives of trillions of beings doesn't change my responsibility to do the job properly. Vextol felt a familiar sense of admiration for this remarkable human who had accidentally revolutionized his understanding of power and responsibility. Marcus Webb approached the most complex challenges in galactic history with the same methodical professionalism he had once applied to inventory management, and somehow this made him the most effective agent of positive change the galaxy had ever seen. Marcus, there is something else I must tell you. The Galactic Council has made their decision about the Chief Efficiency Coordinator position. And they have unanimously approved your appointment. You will be responsible for optimizing the governmental systems of over 2,000 species across multiple galaxies. It is, quite literally, the largest administrative challenge in known history. Marcus nodded thoughtfully, already beginning to consider the analytical framework such a project would require. I'll need to assemble a larger team. This isn't a one-person optimization project. The Council is prepared to provide unlimited resources and personnel. And timeline? They suggest a 10-year analysis and implementation period. Marcus pulled up a new spreadsheet on his tablet and began sketching out preliminary project parameters. I think we can do better than that. If we structure the analysis in phases and implement improvements iteratively rather than waiting for comprehensive completion, we could probably show measurable results within 18 months. You accept the position? Of course. It's the logical next step. Besides, Marcus added with a slight smile, it'll look great on my resume. 2 years after Marcus Webb's appointment as Chief Efficiency Coordinator for the Galactic Council, the changes he had implemented were reverberating throughout known space in ways that no political scientist could have predicted and no military strategist could have planned. The transformation hadn't been dramatic or revolutionary in the traditional sense. There had been no wars, no conquests, no paradigm-shifting technologies. Instead, Marcus had applied the same methodical approach he had always used: identify inefficiencies, design optimization strategies, implement improvements, measure results, and iterate. The results had been extraordinary. Galactic Council decision-making, which had previously required an average of 47 months for major resolutions, now averaged 3.2 months. Resource allocation disputes that had historically escalated into decades-long conflicts were now resolved through systematic cost-benefit analysis within weeks. The bureaucratic overhead that had consumed 73% of the Council's operational resources had been reduced to 18%, while actually improving service delivery across all metrics. Most importantly, Marcus had solved the fundamental problem that had plagued galactic democracy for millennia: the mathematical impossibility of achieving consensus among thousands of vastly different species with incompatible values, goals, and worldviews. His solution had been elegantly simple: stop trying to achieve consensus and start optimizing for aggregate benefit. Dr. Elena Vasquez, who had been appointed as Marcus's deputy coordinator, and who served as his interpreter when dealing with species whose communication methods were incompatible with spreadsheets, stood with him on the observation deck of the Galactic Council Central Station, watching the bustle of activity that represented the new reality of interstellar governance. "Marcus," she said, "do you ever step back and appreciate what you've accomplished here?" Marcus looked up from his tablet, where he was reviewing optimization metrics for the Outer Rim territorial disputes. "What do you mean?" "You've accidentally solved the fundamental problem of democracy at galactic scale. You've created the most effective governmental system in known history. You've eliminated conflicts that had persisted for millennia. You've increased prosperity, reduced inequality, and established sustainable peace across multiple galaxies." "I've optimized some administrative processes," Marcus replied, returning his attention to his data. "It's the same thing I was doing on Kepler 62e, just with more variables." Elena stared at her colleague, marveling at his complete inability to recognize the magnitude of his own achievements. "Marcus, species across the galaxy are naming their children after you. You've become a legend. Some civilizations are developing religions based on your optimization principles." "That seems excessive," Marcus observed. "Process optimization really isn't that complicated once you understand the basic principles. That's exactly why it's so remarkable. You've taken concepts that seem impossible to other species and made them seem obvious." Before Marcus could respond, they were approached by Ambassador Crixtel of the Hegemony Worlds, whose governmental optimization project had exceeded all projected efficiency gains by 23%. "Director Webb," the ambassador said, performing the respectful greeting gesture that had become standard protocol when addressing Marcus, "I bring news from the Outer Rim territories." "The territorial disputes analysis?" "Resolved, sir. Your resource allocation optimization framework eliminated the underlying causes of conflict. All 7 disputed systems have agreed to your recommended cooperative development plan. Projected economic benefits exceed previous estimates by 34%. Marcus nodded, making notes on his tablet. "Any implementation challenges?" "None, sir. The framework you developed addresses all major stakeholder concerns while optimizing resource utilization. The parties involved are describing it as elegant. Good. What about the crystalline collective's consciousness sharing network optimization? Completed ahead of schedule. Network efficiency increased by 89%, user satisfaction up by 156%, and they're reporting breakthrough developments in collective problem-solving capabilities. Elena watched this exchange with fascination. Marcus was casually discussing the resolution of conflicts that had defined galactic politics for centuries, treating them as routine project updates. Director Webb, Ambassador Crixtel continued, "There is one more matter. The Void Pirates have requested expansion of their optimization contract." "What kind of expansion?" "They want to optimize their entire society for constructive purposes. Apparently, efficiency improvements in their raiding operations made them realize they could achieve better results through legitimate commerce and technology development." Marcus looked genuinely pleased by this development. "That's excellent. Applying optimization principles to transition from extractive to productive economic models, it's exactly the kind of systematic improvement that creates sustainable benefits. Sir, the galaxy's most notorious pirates are becoming entrepreneurs because of your efficiency recommendations. Pirates are just business people using inefficient methodologies. Once they understand better approaches, rational actors naturally adopt more effective strategies." After Ambassador Crixtel departed, Elena found herself alone with Marcus again, trying to process the casual way he discussed transforming galactic civilization. "Marcus, do you realize that you've ended war? I've optimized resource allocation to reduce conflict probability," Marcus corrected. "War is just inefficient dispute resolution. Once parties understand that cooperative solutions generate better outcomes than competitive ones, conflict becomes economically irrational. You've created peace through spreadsheets. I've demonstrated that collaborative optimization produces superior results to zero-sum competition. The implementation tools are secondary to the analytical framework." Elena shook her head in amazement. "Do you ever think about what you want to do next?" Marcus considered this question while reviewing his current project queue. The Galactic Council optimization was proceeding ahead of schedule. The major interstellar powers had all completed successful governmental restructuring. Even traditionally isolationist species were requesting consultation services to improve their internal efficiency. "Actually," he said, "I've been thinking about retirement." "Retirement?" Elena couldn't hide her shock. "Marcus, you're 34 years old and you're personally responsible for the most successful period of peace and prosperity in galactic history. You can't retire." "Why not? The systems are optimized, the processes are running efficiently, and I've trained enough deputies to handle ongoing maintenance and iterative improvements. From a professional standpoint, the job is essentially complete." "But what would you do?" Marcus smiled, pulling up a new file on his tablet. "I've been thinking about starting a small business. Maybe going back to basic systems analysis for smaller organizations. I miss the simplicity of optimizing individual processes rather than managing galaxy-wide administrative frameworks." "You want to go back to being a regular accountant?" "Systems analyst," Marcus corrected automatically. "And yes, there's something satisfying about taking a broken filing system and making it work properly. Personal scale optimization has its own rewards." Elena realized that Marcus Webb, the being who had accidentally revolutionized galactic civilization through professional competence, genuinely missed the simple satisfaction of fixing small problems for individual clients. "Marcus," she said finally, "you're probably the only person in galactic history who could optimize the fundamental structure of interstellar democracy and then want to retire to help small businesses organize their inventory systems." "Everyone has their preferences," Marcus replied, already sketching out a business plan for web systems analysis, comprehensive optimization solutions for small and medium enterprises. As he worked, Elena reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this point. A single human, accidentally captured due to a bureaucratic error, had transformed the galaxy not through military conquest or political revolution, but through the relentless application of professional competence to every system he encountered. He had defeated the greatest warrior in galactic history by offering to help him fight more efficiently. He had revolutionized interstellar governance by treating democracy as an optimization challenge. He had ended conflicts, increased prosperity, and established sustainable peace across multiple galaxies, all while maintaining the demeanor of someone filing quarterly reports. And now, having accidentally achieved what philosophers, generals, and statesmen had attempted for millennia, Marcus Webb was planning his retirement so he could return to fixing filing systems and optimizing supply chains for small businesses. It was, Elena realized, the most perfectly human response imaginable. "Marcus," she said, "when you do retire, will you at least consider writing a manual? Galactic optimization for dummies or something? Future generations might benefit from understanding your methods." Marcus looked up thoughtfully. "That's not a bad idea. Process optimization principles are broadly applicable. A comprehensive guide could help other analysts avoid some of the iterative learning I had to do. And maybe include a section on how to accidentally conquer empires through efficiency recommendations?" "That was a very specific circumstance," Marcus replied seriously. "I'm not sure the methodology would generalize to other situations." Elena began laughing, and found she couldn't stop. Here was the being who had reshaped galactic civilization, discussing his world-changing achievements as if they were routine professional experiences that might not be relevant to other people's careers. Marcus Webb had become the most influential being in galactic history by refusing to see himself as anything more than a competent systems analyst who happened to work on large-scale projects. And somehow, that was exactly what had made him so remarkably effective. Hey there, incredible humans! If this story about the ultimate power of professional competence didn't completely blow your mind, I don't know what will. The idea that humanity's secret weapon might not be our combat prowess or our technology, but our ability to look at any system, no matter how complex or ancient, and say, "This could be more efficient," is both hilarious and terrifying. I want to know what you think. Have you ever been in a situation where your boring professional skills turned out to be exactly what was needed to solve an impossible problem? Drop a comment and share your own stories of accidentally saving the day through sheer competence. And if you think more alien empires need to discover the devastating power of spreadsheet optimization, absolutely smash that like button and let me know what galactic system you think Marcus should tackle next. I've got another mind-bending story coming up about what happens when humans encounter a species of cosmic perfectionist artists and accidentally teach them that good enough is actually better than perfect. Trust me, when alien perfectionists meet human pragmatism, the results are spectacular. Until next time, remember Marcus Webb's ultimate lesson: sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is treat impossible problems like they're just another day at the office. Because apparently the universe runs on the same basic principles as a well-organized filing system, it just needed someone with the right professional experience to point that out. See you in the next one, fellow efficiency experts.